So there is a belief in conservatives and conservative economics. There's a big division in economics between there's different types of economics. Obviously, we've talked about Marxist economics, and then there's like more more closer to the center version, centrist versions of economics. And I would basically call the two competing, like the mainstream competing forms of economics, roughly divide into like post-Keynesians and neoclassical economics. Sometimes we call that freshwater and saltwater economists. And you could talk about like the post-Keynesians or the neo-Keynesians, and there's also kind of like more heterodox fusions of Marxism and Keynesianism. And all I'm trying to say here is that there is a version of economics that we would basically call kind of like fundamentalism, and we call these people freshwater economists, and they believe in a lot of cockamamie bullshit. One of the things they believe in is called the efficient market hypothesis, and one of the things that it posits is that markets contain all information, right? So when you go buy something, all possible information is already reflected in the price. Everything is always priced in. Now, spending a week watching Wall Street will make, especially now, will make you realize that's fucking nonsense. These people are they're just trading off of the barest hint of news. Trillions of dollars is moving on rumors. And the rumor that's making the stocks pop today is, I just had a great call with the acting president of South Korea. We talked about their tremendous and unsustainable surplus, tariffs, shipbuilding, large-scale purchase of U.S. and liquid natural gas. Excuse me. Okay, let's start again. I just had a great call. Okay, we're starting a third time. Okay, third time's the charm. We're waking up, folks. It's still early. I just had a great call with the acting president of South Korea. We talked about their tremendous and unsustainable surplus, tariffs, shipbuilding, large-scale purchase of U.S. liquid natural gas, their joint venture in an Alaska pipeline, and payment for the big-time military protection we provide to South Korea. They began these military payments during my first term, billions of dollars, but sleepy Joe Biden, for reasons unknown, terminated the deal. That was a shocker to all. In any event, we have the confines and probability of a great deal for both countries. Their top team is on a plane heading to the U.S., and things are looking good. We are likewise dealing with many other countries, all of whom want to make a deal with the United States. Like with South Korea, we are bringing up other subjects that are not covered by trade and tariffs and getting them negotiated also. One-stop shopping is a beautiful and efficient process. China also wants to make a deal badly, but they don't know how to get it started. We are waiting for their call. It will happen. God bless the USA. Okay, so what does this deal actually say? Nothing. What does this actually say? Nothing. He just says we talked about things and they want to make a deal. Now, trade is good. Trade is good. The problem is we live in a world where there is freedom for capital, there's freedom for goods, but there isn't freedom for labor. And because labor isn't free, it allows it to be exploited. We live in a world now where you are a serf, but instead of being owned by an individual landlord, you're owned by an individual country. And the countries conspire to keep their populations ring-fenced so that they cannot flow where it's economically rational, where they would get the highest wages and highest economic benefit. And because of that ring fencing, because of that constraint, they're able to hyper exploit workers. That's the world that the capitalists want to live in, where nations exist only to make sure that you get paid shit so they can maximize their profits. Now, my general feeling is this. The markets, the markets understand that if tariffs actually go into place, it will cause an economic depression. And so in their heart of hearts, they don't believe it's going to happen. We had 6,000 crews from around the country working on our power lines at 90% of our substations, and the power lines were destroyed. They sent half of them home because they broke some rules. We're just trying to restore power as fast as possible. When the state government got involved, they took over the order of operations. Also, just bury the lines is perfect because all the lines are fucked. Yeah, I mean, they won't. They have to spend money for that.
Donald Trump's tariffs have pushed global stock markets into meltdown. And unlike with the global financial crisis or the fallout from the pandemic, this isn't a crisis that's come around by accident, but one that's been designed. Now, this has led many people to call the tariff shock unprecedented, but not everyone agrees. Yanis Varoufakis has written in Unheard magazine, "This commentator should know better than to pretend the shock Trump is now delivering is both unprecedented and bound to fail, like all reckless assaults on the prevailing order. The Nixon shock was more devastating than the one delivered today, especially for Europeans, and precisely because of the economic devastation caused, its architects achieved their main long-term objective to ensure American hegemony grew alongside America's twin, that's trade and government budget, deficits." So the Nixon shock was the moment in 1971 when Richard Nixon, then president, suspended the conversion of dollars into gold. So that had the effect of unilaterally blowing up the post-war Bretton Woods system that had regulated global financial markets and trade since 1944. It was a key move in the development of neoliberalism. I caught up with Yanis to discuss the relevance of this historical comparison and to get his view on how China, Europe, and the UK should respond to Trump's tariff shock. I started, though, by asking him about a more recent historical event, namely how he thinks the Trump shock compares to the 2008 global financial crisis.
2008 was our generation's 1929, so nothing compares with that in terms of the catastrophic magnitude of the shock. And also, remember, 2008 was utterly unexpected. It wasn't planned, it wasn't designed.
Northern Michigan still has 30K with no power. Hopefully you guys can get it back soon. Was the gold standard good? That was basically the way the gold standard was about settling international trade deficits. They would transfer gold back and forth based on whether you had a deficit or not.
Trump's shock is a designer shock. He chose it. So in that sense, I think we need to compare it to the events of the 15th of August, 1971, the Richard Nixon shock, which was an attempt, just like Trump is attempting to upend the world economic system. Richard Nixon did exactly the same thing with enormous success, I have to say, not from the perspective of the peoples of the world, not even the American working class or middle class, but from the perspective of those in Washington, D.C. and Camp David, to be more precise, for that summer's day in 1971, whose job was, or whose remit was, to extend American hegemony in an era when America had become a deficit country. So there are many similarities with 1971.
In 1971, that was Richard Nixon taking America away from the gold standard, so moving to a fiat currency system. I mean, you're much more of an expert on that era than I am, and sort of this issue in general. Were people saying a similar thing back then, though? Because I know, people do put forward there could be a theory behind Trump's actions trying to reshape the global economy in a similar way that Nixon did back then. But also, what Trump's doing does just seem like sort of chaotic. I imagine that Nixon was a little bit more rational than Trump is now, or do you have a different perspective?
Not in the slightest. Back then, it didn't look rational. It looked like economic nationalism, geoeconomics, put it as you wish. Remember, 2 days before the Nixon shock, his Treasury Secretary, John Connolly, was the Texan politician who was in the car with JFK when JFK was shot. And he transferred to the Republicans and became Nixon's Treasury Secretary. A couple of days before the Nixon shock, in a bid to encourage him to go ahead with that, he infamously said to the president the following, and I think it's verbatim. He said, "Mr. President, my understanding is that the foreigners are trying to screw us, and our job is to screw them before they screw us." That's verbatim. And 2 days later, with a view to diminish the value of the dollar by 30%, to create magnificent forces of destruction in Europe, in Japan, and also in the United States, forces that he knew would impact very significantly on the American economy. Think of the stagflation that hit the American economy. But the theory was that the impact on the American economy would be lesser than the impact on Germany and Japan in particular, and that would restore the American hegemony, which they were fearing they were losing as a result of becoming a deficit country. There was nothing mild or more rational about what Nixon did in 1971. It doesn't mean that what Trump is doing now is going to succeed, because Nixon's shock could easily have ended up very, very differently. So it will all depend on how the rest of the world reacts to Trump, not so much on the rationality or irrationality of what he's doing at the moment.
Let's talk about what the headlines have all been about this weekend, which is the stock markets and their crash, sort of falling between sort of 5 and 15%. Should Navarra media viewers care if the stock market is taking a hit?
Well, in the same way that Novara media audiences have no right to rejoice when the markets go through the roof, we don't have the right to take their collapse or temporary fall as a sign that all hell is coming loose. Look, the manner in which stock exchanges and money markets progress is highly divorced from the way in which humanity progresses. So there may be a coincidence of exuberance or disaster, but it's just a coincidence.
It seems to me that Trump wants to be Nixon, Reagan, Bush, Hoover, and Goldwater all in one. Here's the reality. Like, I've always said this for a while, which is there's absolutely, and this is what separates me from almost every other commentator, so-called commentator on the left, is that I actually understand economics. And the thing is, what Trump is doing is he's doing things in a slapdash and poorly organized fashion. But the general idea of having the American economy shift back to being more industrial than it has been, shifting away from, financialization and hollowing out basically the productive capability of the American state and manufacturing sector, is a smart move if you're trying to stop China. Like, you need to do that if you don't want China to become the most powerful country in the world. And I think it's because Americans are kind of delusional about America being number one, especially liberals who are upper middle class and relatively prosperous, that they think that a big disruption of their treats is like obviously wrong. And my view is that it's not. Now, the way that Trump is doing it is absolutely stupid. America, we used to make the majority of our socks here in the United States till the 90s. There were large steel mills in my hometown, I guess, up until the late 90s. Like, a lot of the stuff that has been fully destroyed wasn't really fully destroyed till after NAFTA. We saw like a massive drop of like 25-30% of manufacturing jobs in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's only continued to decline from there. Meanwhile, in China, they have like hundreds of millions of manufacturing jobs. So to be like, no, it's totally unreasonable to think that we can have 20 million manufacturing jobs in America, while in China they have 120 million. It's like, what are you talking about? And the reason why manufacturing jobs are superior to other forms of jobs is because you have leverage. You have leverage. Manufacturing employees, proletarians, have leverage over their employees that other types of jobs just simply do not have. Like, I'll give you the example of Denmark. In Denmark, McDonald's workers make $25 an hour. But do you know who makes even more? Manufacturing workers in Denmark. They make $50 an hour or more. So it's not just like, it's not a fetishization of manufacturing. It's that manufacturing does actually provide a tremendous amount of value that more service-oriented or financialized jobs just don't do. And the reason why China has risen into a world superpower is because their manufacturing capability, their construction capability has generated tremendous well-being and wealth for their people that's apparent. And so I don't think it's wrong to try to reconstruct that. Now, the problem is Donald Trump is doing it the dumbest way possible, which is he's a market fundamentalist. And if you're trying to compete against China, not learning any of the lessons they've learned, which is don't be a market fundamentalist, is kind of amazing.
Very often, when the stock exchanges are celebrating, the vast majority of the population are suffering, and vice versa.
Exactly,
so the
Tyler.
big question here is this. What has been happening since 1971, between 1971 and today, is a very significant class war against the working class of the United States, the working class of Britain, the working class of Germany, the working class of China, waged by an interesting coalition between American rentiers who no longer wished to be capitalists. They were happy simply to collect rents through the financial sector, through private equity, through big tech, and the capitalists of Germany, the capitalists of Japan, and the capitalists of China. The status quo that the radical center is lamenting today, because it is true that the Trump shock is a major blow at this liberal order. The status quo that they've been lamenting has been a grossly imbalanced one where inequality has been rising triumphantly at the expense of the capacity of most people to imagine that the world would be better for their children than it is for them. So this is what the status quo is. It could get worse. There's no doubt about that. Mrs. Thatcher taught me as a young man that when you think that things can't get worse, they do. But the interesting question is now,
this Asian leader is taking a very different approach from China over Trump's tariff war. I mean, yeah, of course, South Korea is a puppet state of the United States, of course.
Take China.
Of course they're not.
Is China going to respond?
We have like 15,000 soldiers in South Korea. Like, yeah, no shit.
To Trump by raising the living standards of the Chinese so that they can consume more of the stuff that so far has been going to the United States in the form of net exports? Will they find some way of communicating with the inane Europeans who seem to have absolutely no idea of what is going on? Or is Europe and China going to engage in a tariff war between them as the European Union tries to impede the diversion of China's net exports from the United States to Europe? So it will all depend on that. And unfortunately, the majority of people out there, whether we're talking about the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Spain, have no say in very significant decisions that will determine whether the shock of Donald Trump can become a force for good or another force that enhances inequality and diminishes their prospects.
I mean, a response to sort of Donald Trump's trade war, I think, from many in the liberal establishment has been to sort of say everything was perfect before. Is there a danger you're going in sort of too far in the other direction? Because, I mean, if you look at what's happened since 1971, yes, inequality has increased, especially in sort of Western countries. But in China, for example, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. And there are countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh which seem to have been on that trajectory to some degree, incomes rising, the middle class growing, and sort of Trump putting an end to the system whereby countries like China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh can get rich via export-led growth. You know, that might be something we would miss, no?
Look, indeed, capitalism is a terrible system, but it can only get worse sometimes if the powers that be act in the way that ruling classes have acted before, that is, idiotically. So, look, you know me because I sort of became politically active as a result of the Euro crisis. What was the Euro crisis?
Market fundamentalism, also known as free market fundamentalism, a term applied to strong belief in the ability of unregulated, laissez-faire, free market capitalist policies to solve most economic and social problems. Yeah, of course, it's nonsense.
Things going swimmingly in Europe for the majority of people up until 2010? No. Things were extremely hard for large sections of the working class across Europe. And the Euro crisis came. It was an opportunity to improve things, but it was also an opportunity to make things worse. And it turned out that it made them worse. So it is highly plausible that Donald Trump's shock is going to reduce prosperity even below the levels at which we found it.
All right, Chad, let's go over to the trade rep is doing
the trade deficit. But what I hear him saying there is that they're open to ideas that don't include tariffs. So that's the focus when other countries are coming to the table. What can you offer us to help reduce the trade deficit that might not include a tariff as long as we reach that same end goal? That's where they're focused. He also was asked specifically.
Oh, my Lord. Legal status revoked for 985,000 migrants who entered U.S. under Biden-era Customs and Border Patrol One app. The Department of Homeland Security is terminating parole protections for those who entered the country through the CBP One app, revoking status for hundreds of thousands of people who came to the U.S. under the Biden administration. So basically, they're turning legal migrants into illegal aliens. Roughly 985,000 people who use the app to make appointments at the port of entry at the border, with those who entered often permitted to seek asylum and given temporary work authorization. The Biden administration abused the parole authority to allow millions of illegal... This isn't even a million, so not interesting. Which further fueled the worst border crisis in the U.S. history under federal law. Secretary Noem, in support of the president, has full authority to revoke parole. Canceling these paroles is a promise kept to the American people to secure our borders and protect national security. Now, it's important to understand here that these people followed the rules. And they have the international legal right to apply for asylum. It's also important to understand that the United States is trying to destroy Cuba and Venezuela's economy with sanctions, stealing their assets that are in American banks and in American territory, preventing and blockading ships from trading with these countries. So, like, the United States of America is destroying countries' economies. People leave those countries because they are trying to seek, economic opportunity. And then they come here and apply for asylum. They get legal status in this country, and then we throw them out. And we're going to round up 1 million people? Yeah. Supreme Court allows Trump to enforce Alien Enemies Act for rapid deportations for now. Yeah, I saw that. We're going to talk about that more.
Some advantage there. I would just say to keep an eye on Greer, because Lighthizer similarly started sort of in a background role and became quite a leader, became a right-hand man to President Trump, was even floated as a chief of staff in the first term, if you guys remember that. So we'll see where Greer goes from here. But if he stays in Trump's good graces, it's often, Trump likes his trade advisors to stay front and center.
Megan, in terms of trying to characterize where things stand for potential negotiations, I guess Japan and now also potentially South Korea as well, given the post we got this morning from the president?
Yes, absolutely. And just in the last couple of minutes of the hearing before I came to sit here, the ambassador Greer was asked about China specifically. He was sort of sowing doubt on a quick deal with China. He was saying that so far the administration is focused on talking most closely with trading partners that are offering solutions or trying to find ways to reduce the trade deficit. They're really not happy. As we heard Besant say on our air this morning as well, they're really not happy with China's retaliation. So what Greer said is that the president is prioritizing these talks with folks who are trying to cut their tariffs and trying to make a deal, and that China so far is really not high on that list. He said Trump wants to focus on other partners and not on China at this point.
Megyn, great.
Why are they moving up? Because they're being optimistic that their tariffs won't actually happen. This is what I said would happen yesterday. Let me see if I could find, if somebody could find what I said yesterday. I said, my feeling right now is that let me just see if I could find if we could find the clip, because I think my explanation yesterday literally just explains it the best. Okay. Let me see here. I kind of remember I was looking at, I don't know how, man, I feel like I was looking at the stock market and I was like, maybe somebody has it and can find it for me, but I was looking at the stock market and I was saying it started with a crash, that it spiked on hopes that tariffs were going to be repealed, the rumor, right? And then that rumor turned out not to be true, and that it crashed again, and then it slowly just kind of traded sideways as it went to basically zero on the day, and then it crashed at the end of the day to like negative 500. But basically, if somebody could find it, I'll replay it, but I can't remember when it was. I'll just restate my point. My point is that what people, if the markets think that tariffs are not going to happen, that's going to cause people to rush into the market, right? In the immediate short term. If people think the tariffs are actually going to happen, they're going to panic. Because right now, the average person in the markets doesn't really believe that Trump is going to do the tariff thing because it seems so irrational and insane, right? And it'll cause a depression. So they, some people, whenever they start to believe it, that it might actually happen, the markets crash. When they are allowed to delude themselves into thinking it's not going to happen,
at Baird, we have investor relations.
Then they buy. So right now, there's an opportunity to get where big swings to the up and big swings to the down, and that's what we're going to fluctuate into until we actually see an outcome that could definitively be declared, like the tariffs are actually happening or the tariffs are not going to happen. You said it was between it's over and nothing ever happens. Exactly. Exactly.
Some more, you may be able to sell it for cash. Get an instant estimate at ovidlife.com or scan the QR code on your screen. Or call 1-800-502-0100. That's 1-800-502-0100.
What about the argument that Trump wants to enact pain because that helps fascism? I don't think that's true. I think Donald Trump recognizes there's a lot of truth to what Donald Trump is saying, which is America is weak and China is strong, and the current international regime will lead to the United States being supplanted by China. And so even though there's a lot of benefits for America to continue the status quo, if current trends continue, the United States will not be the world superpower anymore. And we have significant and structural weaknesses that make resisting China nearly impossible. No, it's fine, Comrade Customs. I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention
really
to your stuff in Michigan.
Something that really makes a difference. Jolie has been a tremendous gift. It's something that is not only looks beautiful, but makes us feel.
What was that? What? Did you say something? Did you say something? You say something?
Just looking.
Wait, the president's not doing the tariffs?
What? No.
Whoa, guys, it was just negotiating. We're back. We are so back. We are so.
Yeah, I didn't say anything.
You just said.
And I'm just like a random guy.
I thought my ears told me that actually things are good and not bad.
Seems like you guys are just looking for anything to make things better. What?
Then why do you keep talking?
That's exactly it.
Cash now and get the cash you need now from your structured settlement. Call now.
Is China making the right move? The answer is yes. China should try to cause a economic depression if the basically if China doesn't react, the United States will effectively be able to isolate China, blockade it, and try to destroy its economy through isolation. So if China has to retaliate and create, because everyone still relies on Chinese technology and Chinese manufacturing for much of the consumer goods of the world, not a majority of it, but I think it's like 45% or something. China has to act now while it still has leverage. If it allows itself to be isolated, if it allows itself to be sanctioned, if it allows itself to be ring fenced in and doesn't strike back, then in the future it will not have the economic muscle to ensure fair access for its industrial and other products.
You get one of these, complete cascading declines like we had, very high volatility. The volatility index hit 60 pre-market yesterday. You usually do have these big swings. So even the bounces, they're often very.
The Chinese economy is not a pond, but an ocean. The ocean may have its calm days, but big winds and storms are only to be expected. Without them, the ocean wouldn't be what it is. Big winds and storms may upset a pond, but never an ocean. Having experienced numerous winds and storms, the ocean will still be there. It is the same for China. After going through 5,000 years of trials and tribulations, China is still here. Looking ahead, China will always be here to stay. Okay, they're getting poetic out there. That's a
nothing
bad sign,
type market
by the way.
either. Everything's up or everything's down, because that would mean we're trying to assess what the impact on earnings is, what we can sort of say about revising the fundamental backdrop.
Sure. I think we have to talk about the why. So
whenever politicians are like more poetic, that's a bad sign.
ways to soothe the market. The fact that he was the one that posted that he's going to be negotiating with Japan. The fact that there are negotiations. Yes. The president even saying that China's welcome to come talk and make a deal.
Yes.
I mean, the rhetoric has changed around that.
No doubt about it, yeah.
Having said that, nothing fundamentally has changed with these sky-high tariff rates. So for companies that are about to report earnings, how are they going to know?
I think it's just going to be a fog, and they're not going to profess to have a real sense of what they're dealing with. They're probably going to be conservative in their outlooks. The question is, has the market already priced that conservative
or
view?
no outlooks.
Right.
I mean, they're going to get.
Hey, that's what happened in COVID. People pulled their outlook, pulled their guidance altogether. I'm not saying it's the same situation now, but that is what did happen. And that would link up with the idea that Sunday night into Monday was the moment of maximum trade hawkishness as well, right? Where you sort of didn't have a sign that there was going to be actual negotiations. And look, there's still the possibility that it was kind of a massive shock. The market had to deal with it. And now it's about, can things get resolved in time to avoid the big economic impact, which there will be a big economic impact no matter what happens. Even if it's 10% tariffs on everything, it's like a few $100 billion tax increase all out of nowhere.
It's a recession, though, and that's a key question, right, when it comes to pricing these earnings and the outlook.
Without a doubt. All right, we're going to stick with the markets right here and whether, of course, we can trust the current rebound. Joining us now, Northwestern Mutual Wealth Management CIO, Brent Schutte. Brent, it's great to have you on here. So how are you, just pick up where we left off there, and how are you viewing the market action the last couple of days in terms of setting your expectations for where we go?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's still a shorter-term bounce. I don't think this is the bottom yet. I think there's still more to go. If you think about it, I do think this is more of a revenue and a restructuring versus a negotiation. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there's going to be some economic damage no matter what occurs in the coming months, because I don't think tariffs are going away. And so with that as an overriding question, with the stock market still expensive, with the Fed not running to the rescue, I think there's going to be volatility for quite some time, and I think we still have some downside risk left in equities.
When things move this far and this fast in terms of price, I mean, presumably, some value gets knocked loose in the process, or maybe you see things that look even riskier at this level. So where have you been looking and emphasizing in this move?
I think we kind of break our outlook into a couple different ways. We think about the near term. We've been more cautious, and so we've been underweight equities, and we do still like fixed income, even with the move yesterday. I think the good news is it's still hedging downside risk in equities. Longer term, I think you have to still like small and mid cap. I know they are more economically sensitive. I know there is more damage, and so does everyone else who has not been buying those for the past couple of years. They trade at 14 times earnings. I think there's deregulation on the horizon, and I think there's better days longer term. And that's where I think if you think about that being a longer term investor and not trying to pick bottoms here, I think that's where Americans should be focused on their portfolios in the future.
But I guess, with the deregulation theory, the fact that, can the administration get people excited, get investors excited about that again, including tax cuts, if now this trade policy is deemed to be recession causing?
Let's pretend there's a recession, and I think that could be still an outcome. I think people start thinking about the opposite side of that, where those parts of the market typically do well. And so I think there's some optionality there. It's not just an all coast all clear and we're going to live happily ever after in the near term, and that's where they take off. I think it's more so a valuation basis and a longer term outlook that creates opportunities in those, which I think people should go back to thinking about valuation, which I think they do when times are tough. Look, the stock market, the S&P 500 still trades at 21 times earnings. That's typically not where it bottoms if we do have a recession. That's where I think there's some more downside potential. On the other side of that, 14 times earnings in small and mid caps, I think that's where there's been some discounted reality there already. And that's where it doesn't mean they might not lose some money in the near term. But I think if you're thinking about your portfolio like you should, 3 to 5 years out, that's where I think there's opportunity.
But why couldn't they work at those valuations when the economy was going 3%? And the unemployment rate is 4%. Like, that's the best, I would feel, set up for domestic small caps. Why would they work in a period where it's lower?
Because the economy was bifurcated. The 3% was above the line. Below the line, there were things that were happening where parts of the economy weren't performing well because rates were high, and consumer sectors and companies were actually feeling the pain of that. We're passing through time. That pain is becoming less. And that's where I think on the opposite side of this, there are better days ahead for those. And so that's probably the risk from an economic perspective. It was not all sunshine and roses. Even last year, there were parts of the economy that weren't doing as well, like manufacturing, like housing, like lower income consumers. That's probably where there are risks now, because these tariffs will probably hurt some of those lower income consumers before they help them.
You mentioned, Brent, that fixed income has hedged your equity risk, and that's certainly true on a year-to-date basis. Though we've been talking about how you have had this sell-off in Treasuries. Obviously, credit spreads have widened out over this last little period. What's your read on how fixed income is positioned, and whether, in fact, it's still going to be working as a diversifier?
I think it works for some time when the recession fears are still high. Longer term, I think the most likely outcome of all this is inflation. Look, we have a 7.2% deficit to GDP right now in an expansion. I'm not for sure how we're going to take care of that longer term, and I don't know that we have the wherewithal to do so. And so I think longer term, there is certainly, when you combine in deglobalization, I think there is more of an inflationary push. And so that's not a longer term forever holding. But for right now, with the correlation with the equity markets, with the reality that there are recession risks that are still out there, that's where we want to continue to own those in the near term. And if we're wrong there, I suppose the stock market will probably be right on the other side, and that's where we'll get the upside in those small and mid-cap names.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I gotta listen. I love MR, but what the fuck is this shit? What the fuck is this shit? I legitimately, I'm like holding back. I'm really holding back right now. Like, I posted a reply. I just reposted a reply to this but I said, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union was one of the most radical and militant unions that led the way to the massive growth of U.S. trade unionism and ultimately the victories won by the New Deal. Maybe we should have a different perspective instead of AI slop. If you guys don't know the history of this country, the only reason we have the New Deal and FDR was because of garment workers, like women like this. And I gotta say, like, you're not better than the workers in the third world that make your phones or sew your clothes. You know that, right? Like, you're not better than them. In fact, they make your life incredibly comfortable and affordable. And it's absolutely disgusting. First of all, like every part of it, like this video, I couldn't disagree more with. I think this is like the opposite of my politics, like almost completely opposite. So seeing it from MR is kind of shocking. Now, like, I get mocking Donald Trump's terrible tariff policies because they're indiscriminate and they are, you know, disruptive to the economy and damaging, and the United States doesn't have the capability to build, you know, manufacturing facilities. But the idea that we need to have sweatshops in the third world and it's ridiculous to think that Americans can make high quality products, it's the opposite. And the Great Compression that Sam Cedar likes to talk about, we made our clothes. And they had good union jobs. I mean, it's not that long ago.
There used to be more of us in the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, but a lot of our jobs have disappeared. A lot of the clothes Americans are buying for women and kids are imports. They're being made in foreign places. When the work's done here, we can support our families and pay our taxes and buy the things other Americans make. That's what it means when the label says union.
Look for the union label when you are buying a coat, dress, or blouse. Remember, somewhere our union sewing, our wages going to feed the kids and run the house. We work hard, but who's complaining? Thanks to the ILG, we're paying our way. So always look for the union label. It says we're able to make it USA.
One of the things that makes you a left-winger is that you value the work done by the working class, and you recognize that that's where all value is derived. It's shameful that we engage in trade with people that are proletarianized but denied the right to organize. That we use our State Department and our CIA to prevent unionization. Why? Because American companies their interests are that these foreign sweatshops don't become unionized. That's shameful. That is the essence of neoliberalism, is destroy unions using our military and our intelligence services, but do it to foreign workers so Americans don't care. That is the essence of the way America has ruled in the neoliberal era. You understand that, right? Like, why did China, why was there so much stuff moved to China? Well, because the capitalists thought, well, it's an authoritarian hellhole. They won't. The workers will never be able to complain. The workers will never be able to, demand higher wages. They thought that the capitalists, were going to be able to rule the roost because China was authoritarian. That was what they were going for. But they miscalculated. They didn't realize that the Chinese Communist Party actually wanted to raise the standard of living of its workers and make China prosperous and wealthy. And they didn't just want to be corrupt figureheads for exploitation, like many American-aligned leaders are in places in the third world. America thought China will be exploitable just like we exploit sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. We'll be able to do the same to China. They miscalculated. And now that's why we're in a trade war, because they miscalculated. They thought that China was going to operate like Liberia or something. And it turned out that the Chinese Communist Party had a long-term view, and they were going to raise the standard of living of their workers, and they were going to industrialize their country, and they were going to urbanize their country, and they were going to do even development and infrastructure, and they were going to build up their strength over a long-term project using the expertise and the wealth from abroad, and they were going to catch up in development to the rest of the world. And they hadn't lost sight of their long-term goals. And now the United States, recognizing that China's economy is 25% bigger than the United States, but the United States has one thing China doesn't have: control of the international finance system and international trade because of the dollarization of international trade settlement. And so the United States, at a desperate last gasp, is doing these tariffs. Look at this tweet, the thread from the Idaho who owns a business. We have an order in currently with our factory that in 2024 would have been 4,707 in tariffs. You know what my reaction is to all these tariffs? Do you know what honest to God, I've been thinking, chat? I've been thinking I should start myself a merch company. I've been thinking to myself, I should start a merch company that begins unionized and just, or cooperative, and just tries to fill, because people are not going to be able to do their stupid drop shipping bullshit anymore. Somebody, like, there's a huge opportunity to like start a co-op or start a union company right now and just grow tremendously in especially the streaming space.